latest episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Julio Garcia-Aguilar, who's the chief of colorectal surgery at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, where he also holds the Stuart Kwan Chair in colorectal surgery. Julio was born in a small village near Madrid, where he soon went to attend university and graduate from medical school. He moved to the United States to spend some time doing research and then completed his residency. It wasn't long before he was talent spotted by the group in Minnesota, where he completed a fellowship in colorectal surgery and became a young attending. Over the next few decades, he spent some time in Minnesota, San Francisco, and Los Angeles before becoming chief of colorectal surgery at Memorial in New York. Throughout his career, he has displayed a dogged determination to change the way we treat patients with rectal cancer, and of course, probably more than anyone in the Northern Hemisphere, has led the charge in terms of non-operative management. He's an enthusiastic supporter of Barcelona Football Club and a very active cyclist. We spent a lot of time today discussing all of these issues and more. If you liked the podcast, please like and subscribe to the channel and send whatever comments you may have. But without further ado, let's join the conversation with Julio Garcia-Aguilar. My name is John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. Hello to you, and thank you so much. It's taken us almost 2 years to organize this.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just,
Absolutely.
you're obviously way more important than I ever thought.
No, come on. No, that's not true. That's not true. The problem is that, you know, eh, my apprehension about public speaking, and this is a little bit public. So,
Well, it is, but as I think I said to you at some point, you are the third of what I referred to as the three amigos, because I think the very first podcast interview I did was Jeff Matthews.
yes,
And then subsequently, I did Julio Mel.
yeah,
So I've been waiting to do the third of the three amigos for some time,
yeah.
because they all said nice things about you. And anyway, so welcome anyway to. I'm delighted you've been able to find some time to join this little podcast called Surgeons' Lives. But really, as you know. What I try and do is focus on things that what I refer to as stuff that matters, which is not really how many papers or how many titles or all that sort of stuff, but the things that show that surgeons there's more to them than just the CV. So now always I ask people to start, and in your case, of course, it's particularly appropriate to start with a little background of your life and start with the words "I was born in." So off you
Wow.
go.
Yeah, I was born in a small village in the countryside in Spain. Um, the name of the town is Escalona. It's in the province of Toledo, not too far from Madrid. An hour um, west of Madrid, close to the mountain range. Um, I was at the tail of the post-war in Spain when the country was still very impoverished
Mhm.
after Spanish Civil War, and the isolation of the Franco regime. I I grew up in the tail of that, but I was lucky to get some opportunity for education. Um, and then I left the village to be in boarding school, and that's how I ended living. Um, Won a scholarship when I was 10, went to boarding school, and then just everything followed the path that most people do.
Sure. And what were your big influences then? I mean, your family obviously, and can you remember, what was driving you, and did you have Your life has been characterized by focused determination. Your career, I should say. Was it there when you were young?
I don't know if focus was there. Um, Determination was probably there. That was kind of driven by my family, hardworking people, interested in us having an education.
Yeah,
You know, no one had a higher education in my family ever. I was the first one to finish high school or go to college, but I think they have a very good sense of how important education was. So again, I had the opportunity to leave the village because there were no formal schooling leading to higher education there at the
yeah.
time, and go to
Mhm.
boarding school. It was not easy at the beginning, but my family was very determined that they
Yeah,
were going to get an education, and eventually, I guess that you pick up when the family push ends. You have to maybe keep it, and I kept it,
yeah, yeah.
and then I was that. So I think early on, probably the family was the main influence. Later on, of course, I had mentors through my life, but yeah,
Did you know early on you wanted to be a doctor, or did that just emerge?
I think emerged. When I was in the school, my interest was mostly science, and I don't know if it was lack of knowledge. The figure of the physician were very patent, even in the village. They were one of the most prominent people,
Yeah,
and it was a good way to be kind of in science. I
yeah,
like biology, I like chemistry, so I think it was kind of natural, to just follow medicine. In my case, maybe I had a little bit of a vocation also.
sure.
Um, so I think that was the main contributing
And
factor.
so you did your medical school in Madrid?
Yes, I did. Yep, I did a medical school in the University of Madrid. So I studied in Toledo, my middle school and high school, and eventually for the university. There was no university in Toledo, so I went to the Universidad Complutense in Madrid.
And then somehow you found yourself in the United States.
Yeah, well, the main influence. I mean, you talk about people who had influence in your life. I think the first, in Spain, we had the 6 year medical school. Essentially, the first 2.5, 3 years are the preclinical sciences, where you study chemistry, you study biology, physiology, all these type of things, and then there is the clinical part, the last 3 years. I was very lucky to meet some mentors that had a broad perspective of the medical education. They had been trained in England, so I had a mentor who kind of opened my world very significantly, and I started to see how you know research was happening, where was it happening, things that we didn't have available in those days in Spain in great measure. I mean, maybe there was in some places, but not you know, and that kind of opened my horizons. I saw where things were happening. Things were happening in the United States, science, the publications, everything was coming from there, and that kind of started my interest in broadening my horizons. And first in England, I spent time in England, and then in the United States.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, had you, in your student years or early years, had you traveled much?
Not much, not because, when I was in the school as a kid, when I was in boarding school, I spent the summers in the village. My father had a small business. I had to help him out. And, I did some work with the family. And then in college, I mean, in the university, also did some work with him. And then we had compulsory military service. So I spent a couple of summers there. And then by the time I started my clinical rotations and my clinical years, I was consumed by that,
Yeah,
and then I started to do work there. And then when the need to learn English became very obvious. I had taken French, which was the second language that we used to take when I was a kid. So I had to start learning English. I think the first time I left the country, I went to Ireland to learn some English when I was in my 5th year of medical school because I felt that in addition to be able to read the textbooks, I had to
Yeah.
speak. So that was my first trip abroad
Mhm.
to your country
Yeah.
when I was in medical school.
Yeah, we used to. I remember we would get a lot of Spanish students
Yep,
coming to,
yep.
and then you just did you decide to move to the US, or did you just go for an experience?
Well, I came to the US for the first time when I was in my third year of residency. So after medical school, we had an exam, a competitive exam in Spain to get into residency. I passed the exam and I stayed in the same hospital where I did my medical school in the main university hospital in Madrid, which is where I will meet Julio Mayol. So when I was doing my residency, it became clear that I wanted to go and experience how the medical system was in the United States.
Right.
Um, there was a surgeon from Spain who was chief of vascular surgery at Stony Brook, and he was originally a classmate of my professor in Spain. So he put me in touch with him. I had already done the ECFNG at the time.
Yeah.
I came to do a rotation here for 3 months. Um, of course, I was very impressed. I liked the system. I decided I was going to come back, but I was in my third year of residency, of a 5 year residency. So I went back to Spain. I finished. And of course, while I was finishing my residency, I was making arrangements to come here in a more, in longer, for a longer period. And I ended coming just after I finished my 5 year residency in Spain.
And that's where you met Jeff Matthews.
Correct. I was lucky to get originally a transitional position as a junior resident at Bethel Hospital. I think I arrived there a few months before Jeff came as an intern, and I had a great time. It was an amazing experience that really changed my life forever.
So when did you decide that you were going to stay?
Well, I came without a very clear idea of what I wanted. I never saw myself as an immigrant to the United States who were going to stay here forever. So things change with time. I didn't have a categorical position. I came in a transitional position. So I did a couple of years of clinical work. Then I went to the lab, did research. I had signed to, you know, defend a thesis, to do a PhD in Spain. I had taken courses there during my residency. I spent 3 years in the lab, did research. I was, you know, mesmerized by the experience. I mean, I was really thrilled. It was very exciting, the things that I was learning. And then, I was still unclear whether I was going to stay here or not. And then they offered me the possibility of finishing the residency and become board eligible.
Yeah.
So I went back to the residency, to the clinical work, and became senior and chief. And then when I finished the residency, I eventually went to do a fellowship in colorectal. And even then, still, it was not clear to me whether I wanted to stay here forever or not.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. I mean, clearly, for most people, the moment they do a fellowship, whatever that fellowship is in, but in your case, colorectal in Minneapolis, Minnesota, it's usually a big moment in their career because it defines what they're going to be. And what I was going to ask you is, when did you stop being, at least to other people's minds, the visiting immigrant Spanish dude, and when were you now somebody who was on a track?
Well, you probably know that when you come in a J1 visa, which is the visa I had during my training, you have a requirement to go to your country of origin for 2 years or serve in an underprivileged area. So that was a big dilemma. At the time that when I was doing my fellowship, Dr. Bill Silan, who was the chairman of the department of the Federal Hospital, offered me to join them after the fellowship. And I had that 2 years requirement. So we look at options, and the options were not that thrilling in the United States. So I said, why don't I go back to Spain, where they also wanted me to work there and see how things are, and then I can decide what I do. So I kind of left for Spain with a contract on the table and a lawyer working on a green card for me to return after the
Yep.
2 year period that I had to spend abroad. During those 2 years, Dave Rothenberger came one Christmas to spend time in Spain with the family. He was visiting just as a tourist, and he offered me also to go to Minneapolis, to go back to Minneapolis. So that was the harder decision because at the time I was already married. I had two little kids, and we had to make the decision: do we want to stay in Spain, where I was doing well and I was having a busy practice, or do I want to take a much more academic career and go back to the United States? And after a long discussion with my family and my wife, not everyone was thrilled about it. My wife supported me all my career without any hesitation. We decided to come to Minneapolis. And of the two places, at the time, I felt that Minneapolis was more focused, the type of practice,
Yeah.
and it was going to be better for my career. So we made a decision to come back. It was not easy.
No, I can imagine, and obviously, I have some experience of those decisions and discussions.
Yeah,
You when you went to Minneapolis, every way you looked, there were potential mentors.
correct.
You had Stan and David and Robbie and Lowry, and I mean, it's endless.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, it still is, but in those days it was a phenomenal place.
Yeah, yeah,
We have, as you mentioned, great mentors, great surgeons, a busy practice, so many patients. You have the opportunity to learn every day and grow in every possible way, because you have everything that I needed to succeed. Dave was pretty helpful in setting me at the university hospital, provide resources to do translational research. So I had a phenomenal environment. I have the advantage of being kind of in a private practice with a group where it
yeah.
gave me tremendous experience in something that I didn't know coming from Spain, where it was more of a socialized system, but at the same time being an academic environment. So it was a unique experience. Plus, also there was the human side. My partners in Minneapolis, they were great surgeons, great mentors, but also phenomenal human beings.
Yeah.
We had a great time. We had a blast. We got along personally. We were friends. So my time at Minneapolis was of tremendous growth, and you know, not only professional but also personally. We really became friends for life.
It's interesting, and maybe this is just because you and I are both getting old and senile, but when you look back on your career, what you've just described, I think, is very striking. In at that time, 20 plus years ago, your colleagues were your friends. Um, and the social side of personal relationships was something that is something that I look back upon with great fondness and happy memories. We don't seem to see that nowadays in surgery and in medicine. It's become it's I think that's become the exception rather than the norm. Or am I missing something?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm experiencing the same thing. And I ask that question myself all the time. Is that the environment has changed or have we changed?
Yeah,
Or do we change with age? Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think even with the people who comes to visit us now compared to the visitor that we had in Minneapolis, as you know, in Minneapolis, we had visitors from all over the world all the time.
yeah,
And somehow we found time to meet with these people personally,
yeah,
with them and their families, invited them in our houses,
mm,
have a social relationship, and establish links that they have lasted for a generation.
yeah,
For some reason, I find myself unable to do the same thing today.
yeah.
And I don't know if I have changed. I don't know if we work longer hours. I don't know what it is, but it feels different than it felt when I was in Minneapolis 30 years ago.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's I agree. So, so after many, so if I was to go back in time and find the Julio that was in Minneapolis, a couple of years into that, and said, "Okay, where am I going to find you in 15 years?" What would you have said? What was your ambition at that time? Did you have a vision, or were you just working?
I was just working. I mean, I think I was just working. I was trying to grow. I was not thinking, where am I going to go? We were happy in Minneapolis. I mean, people always, when you tell that you live in Minneapolis, always ask the weather counts, as thing. But when you are living there, I mean, the winters are long, but other than that, we had a very happy life. We
Yeah.
had nice houses, we had nice friends. I was not thinking on, making a change. I couldn't envision where I was going to be 15 years later. Things just happen. Um, I think sometimes I had to give a talk a few years ago about, life and your career path, and the topic was serendipity. I mean,
Yeah.
things happen sometimes that you don't expect, and for the reasons that you don't expect.
So to summarize your career very briefly, you went from Minneapolis to San Francisco to LA to New York, yeah?
Yes, correct.
Um, so you're unusual in that you've experienced the East Coast, the West Coast, and the Midwest.
Yeah.
But the one thing that, and those are very different environments and very different professional and social environments. But the one thing um, that you never lost focus on was the research topic throughout. You had a laser-like focus on that same question that has continued, whether you went from Minneapolis to San Francisco to City of Hope, et cetera, et cetera. I say that for two reasons. One is that I'm always hugely in admiration of people that are able to focus continually, particularly when you move places,
Yeah.
when you move. And secondly, was that entirely intentional, or were you determined? Because and I don't want to, flatter you too much, of course, but you're one of just a handful of people that has made a massive difference to, probably the biggest change in rectal cancer management, since TME, probably.
Well, I mean, I think rectal cancer has always been of an interest of mine. The mentor I was mentioning in medical school was a gastroenterologist who had been in Oxford and had trained with Sidney Trueloff.
Yeah,
So during my medical school and residency, became interested in GI for different reasons. I didn't go into GI, you know, clinical GI, became surgical GI because I always wanted to do things with my hands. And I like GI, but I like to operate, so I became a GI surgeon, so to speak, general surgeon, but with emphasis in GI. And I was interested in everything in GI, but the rectum always had represent a challenge.
yeah,
Remember, I was resident, you were probably resident before we have cross-sectional imaging.
yeah,
Getting into the pelvis was always a big unknown. You were not like today that you know what you are dealing with. Getting to operate the rectum in the early 1980s when I was an intern and a resident, it was a big deal.
yeah,
And so I was memorized by that. I had some good mentors, some good surgeons. So I became interested in that. When I went to Minneapolis, of course, were the days of inflammatory bowel disease, ileoanal pouches were the big topic, but the other one was rectum. And Minneapolis was one of the pioneers in neoadjuvant treatment of rectal cancer. For example, as opposed to the Mayo Clinic, that through the North Central Cancer Treatment Group, they have been emphasizing most postoperative therapy.
yeah. Mm,
And, being in Minneapolis and starting my practice there, I started to see complete responses.
mm.
And I kind of took it a little bit on myself. Say, what does this mean? Why do we take the rectum out in somebody who doesn't have cancer
Yeah.
cells left? And the dictum at the time was, you give me adjuvant therapy and you just operate. You don't even look.
Yeah.
And I must say, some of my partners, Rick Nimmer, John Bulls, they have treated some patients with watch and wait. And I said, can we do these things seriously? So I decided to approach that thing kind of in a scientific way, and I started to look what the response means. And we look at those patients that did better than the one that did have response. What happened if we were longer? So I wrote a trial, through the NIH and R1, and originally was rejected as usual. You're not going to get an R1 just coming out of, being a junior attending without experience. But then I wrote it again, and I ended up getting one, and we studied the issue of the timing. We have done local excision, and the local excision didn't work that well by itself.
Mhm.
And the CALGB has done a trials using local excision and postoperative chemoradiation. So we say, why don't we do the radiation before? Because it has such a good response, and then we do the local excision later. So, we push through the CALGB, then through the ACOSOG, which is the new cancer group. So I think, so you just get an idea and you just pursue that idea. I mean, I think what I didn't know that I had, to be honest, you have asked me when I was in my 20s, if I had persistence, I would
Yeah.
have said no. That was not in my toolbox because I tend to be impatient and I tend to be sometimes scattered. But for whatever the reason, in this particular area of professional career, I persisted.
Yeah.
If any of these trials, I told my mentees now, if you want to do a trial in a cooperative group, be prepared to spend 6 years from the day
Yeah.
that you write the first draft to the day that you accrue the first patient to the trial. That
Yeah.
has been my experience. So you need persistence and endurance. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. So, and I think that what it takes, and then one question leads to the other. So that's how I would summarize my experience with this thing. Just ask one question and just try to answer it
It's,
using the tool that you have.
it's interesting, how people come from different directions to end up at the same place, sometimes. When I started my career in the UK, as you know, I became quite well known for transanal excisions and TEMS and stuff
Yeah,
like that. And as you say, and I'm not being rude, but as you say, the Minneapolis report on local excision set that story back a decade because the results were not good. And it took a while for people to understand that doing it this way is not the same as doing it that way,
yeah,
etc. So that's number one. But I always remember in the very early 90s, my very first watch and wait patient was a patient who had a low rectal cancer that was sent to me for a second opinion, needed an abdominoperineal resection, and absolutely refused to have one because he said, and he showed me through the window, he said, that lady over there is my new wife from Thailand. And he said, I'm not having this operation. So I said, well, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll do chemoradiotherapy and see what happens. Maybe we can do a TEMS. And when I looked at him afterwards, I used to do an EUA in those days on it. I mean, and so I looked at him afterwards. There was literally nothing to be seen.
yeah.
Nothing, no scar, no thickness, nothing. So I thought, well, and all he did was say to me, "You see, I told you." So that was but it is interesting how that there's there you were in Minneapolis, and subsequently, pursuing that theme of, neoadjuvant therapy in different ways. And, those of us who were pursuing, minimally invasive approaches, etc. And we end up now in a position where what I say to people is, the number of radical resections has just collapsed in
Yeah.
the country. Now, I said to somebody recently, because this worries me, the whole scale adoption of watch and wait around the country. Because as you know, I've done a lot of watch and wait, nothing to the amount that you have done, but it's not easy. It's not easy watch and wait. And I wonder sometimes, is it like lap chole? So here's a contentious statement. So when lap chole came along, a lot of patients were badly damaged by surgeons who cut bile ducts and eventually they learned how to do it, and now it's the perfect operation. Of course, that's what everybody had. Do you think that's analogous to where we are, as we're stumbling around in the real world, learning how to do watch and wait, but at the end of the day, we'll make a lot of mistakes, but eventually we'll get it right?
Oh, absolutely. You are absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, I tell people there is nothing too much about watch and wait. You need a patient that is going to be compliant, are going to come to see you, and you need to be flexible. You have to start with the premise that not every patient is going to respond. Okay.
Hmm.
And you have to have a second premise is that we don't have the perfect tools
Yeah,
to assess response at any given time. But we do have something. And something that we have is time. And a couple of thoughts after having worked in this field for a long time. Tumors take time to respond.
yeah,
Tumors take time to regrow. But you need to see the patient
yeah,
and you need to be flexible. So I think that is the critical thing. And you have to be honest. I mean, because again, as I say, in the best case scenario with chemotherapy and radiation, for stage 2, stage 3 disease, we have response rate to 50%.
yeah,
So you have to tell at the beginning to the patient there is a 50% chance that he's not going to respond.
mm,
If I see that he's not gone, 100% gone, you need to have surgery. So I think, yes, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to delay treatment in some patients and you might compromise them. The possibility of cure, of achieving a sphincter saving procedure.
yeah,
And on the other hand, we're going to take some patients to the operating room and we're going to find that they have a pathological complete response.
yeah. Mm,
I rather tend to err in that direction
hmm.
than in the other direction, in the direction of delaying too much the treatment. Of course, there is also the question that it has been raised by many of our friends, which I'm not that worried about, which is the issue of the progression, the distant progression of the tumor from the primary. I have a much more deterministic
Yeah.
understanding of cancer. I think the cancer that they're going to metastasize, they metastasize early on. That's the reason why we use systemic, adjuvant systemic chemotherapy, colon cancer, because those micromets are already probably there. But I think in terms of hurting patients locally, yeah, you can. If you don't see them often enough, and as soon as you see that this tumor is not responding, you take them to the operating room after reasonable.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I mean, without getting into the weeds here, the other thing that's very clear, has been very clear to me is that when you see any change, that's a regrowth,
Oh, sure.
It's, when you do those flex sigs and you take the pictures and the videos, you get to recognize the scar. You go, oh, I remember that scar. Yeah, it looks the same, so,
Correct. Correct. I mean,
um,
I think there are still many things that to talk about these things. Just going to your expertise now with local excision, which, by the way, part of the reason why probably we kill or we delay the adoption of local excision for so long is because we were doing just conventional
yeah,
transaminase,
sure.
which
Yeah.
were not a good operation. Period. If
No.
you can if you can do that operation, just seeing the rectal wall well with the TEMS, with the TAMIs, is a different operation than
Oh,
what we
for
use in our
sure.
device.
Yeah, for
But
sure. And it's
yeah,
interesting you say, as you say, we have time to wait for a tumor to respond. It takes time. It takes time for the regrowth. The other thing that takes time is for surgeons to change their mind.
yes.
People believe what they want to believe. So that's a So that allows me pivot a little bit, and the last question I want to ask you on a serious nature is, so you're going to finish your career still operating on patients, but you've got young faculty coming in. I said to somebody recently, a young faculty, I said, if your business case is based on operating on patients with rectal cancer, in your career, you're going to go bankrupt. You need to think of something else because it's going to go away. Maybe there's a career specializing in operating on regrowth, because that's a slightly different operation. But in 20 years, what, where do you think we'll be percentage-wise in terms of operating on colorectal cancer? Not just because obviously what happens in the rectum just moves into the colon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in our practice, probably now 50% of the patients have a clinical complete response to the conventional chemoradiation and chemotherapy or total neoadjuvant therapy, if you want to call it that way.
Yeah,
Um, what is going to change in the future? I don't know. You know, we have made tremendous advances in understanding the biology of colorectal cancer, but not many of them has become targetable.
yeah,
I mean, the biggest success that we had been the MSI tumor that they respond to immune checkpoint blockade, but that was the low-hanging fruit. Um, in terms of the targeted therapy, there is no one that really is going to give us 100% response. So the targeted therapies that we have today, you know, um, immune interventions in MSS tumors, in MMR proficient tumors, there is a lot of interest on that. Um, just as an adjuvant using immune checkpoint blockades to enhance the response to radiation therapy, or just immune checkpoint blockade alone. I believe that there are going to be a subset of patients that will respond to immune checkpoint blockade. The question is, are those tumors the same way that they respond to radiation therapy?
yeah,
Is possible. Um, you know, Again, it's very difficult to make predictions about the future because somebody might come out with some bacteria which is the cause of colorectal cancer and kill it with an antibiotics. But I think sort of uh, you know luck like that, we're going to be still operating rectal
yeah,
cancer, not as many as we did, and some of these things are going to be translated to the colon. But we had to keep in mind, put this thing in the perspective of the entire world. We can cure most colon cancers relatively with a relatively inexpensive intervention, which today is pretty safe and with minimal long-term functional sequelas. So we have to be mindful about expensive, fancy treatments that they might achieve similar goal, but at a much higher cost. On the other hand, we don't know what some of these expensive treatments are going to cost 10 years down the line because the production might be some cheaper. So
yeah.
definitely we are not going to be doing more surgeries. We're going to be doing less. Um, how how many more patients are going to be treated with some non-surgical treatment is going to depend on our advances in the understanding the biology of the disease, because
I
that really
agree.
what is holding
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, I think it's, the entire neoadjuvant story has taken place in the 21st century, basically in the last 20 years.
Correct.
Um, so it's, the pace of change has been extraordinarily rapid, but I still think it'll take more than another 20 years before it all goes away. So
Correct.
let's move on to other stuff that matters. Now, I think everyone, well, maybe not everyone, is aware that despite the fact that you should be a fan of Real Madrid, you are in fact not a fan of Real Madrid, but in fact completely disloyal and traitorous to your background and a fan of Barcelona.
Well, let me just clarify this thing a little bit. I'm a soccer fan. I have a scene that I haven't probably disclosed to you. That is that really my childhood team is Atletico de Madrid. and it still holds a place in my heart. Um, but being a fan from Atletico de Madrid, which is always an okay team, it has a very nice base and a very nice history, and I don't know what to.
It's
Um,
like being a fan of Everton.
Correct. It's like being a fan of Everton in Liverpool, or in the old days being a fan of Manchester City before
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
new iteration. That's equivalent. It's a
Hmm.
bit of an old fan of Manchester City in the old days. So that was my thing. Of course, Real Madrid, who always used to beat us, and still they do, including
Yeah.
yesterday. Is painful. So Real Madrid was kind of the enemies. Um, Barcelona was just an interesting team. I always had some sympathy. They they are different, and they have a special relationship with Atletico de Madrid because they had a common enemy, which was Real Madrid. So I have some sympathy for Barcelona. I really like a couple of things that happened in Barcelona. Johan Cruyff was
Yes. Mm.
tremendous. He when he came to Barcelona, I don't know if you remember the first time that Johan Cruyff went to Bernabeu with Barcelona. They beat them. I think it was like 5-0 in like 1973 was something unheard of. And then he had a huge impact as a
Yeah.
player and then as a coach, and his legacy with La Masia. And of course, the Barcelona of the last decade and a half, who will not be a fan of Barcelona? They play tremendously. At the time, Mourinho was in Real Madrid. He was not my most.
So here's my question for you. So obviously, if in if there is an edition of El Clasico, you're going to support Barcelona. But if Manchester United was playing Real Madrid, who would you support?
You put me in the spot. So I must say that I have grown to appreciate Real Madrid more as a well-run organization, and honestly, of what it represents for the city and the country. I mean, it's the most successful organization in Spain by a long shot. You have to give them some credit. So
Yeah.
today I will be torn. I mean, there is my Atletico de Madrid kind of hate against the big team that always beats you, but on the other hand is that respect for what Real Madrid means.
Sure.
Plus, also all my friends are Real Madrid fans. When I go to the soccer games in Spain because they have season tickets, they always invited me to go to the Bernabeu. So I go to the Bernabeu much more than I go to see the Atletico de Madrid. It's a kind of a hate love type of relationship that I had developed as I matured.
So you continue to be in Spain very regularly. You have family and stuff like that, etc. Um, when you eventually retire, do you think you'll go back to Spain?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, part of the decisions that I have made in my career, particularly later, it had been kind of aiming in that direction. I still feel Spanish and European. I
Yeah.
love the United States. I mean, I cannot say enough about this country. What it has given to me and to my family is I feel American, but I having come here so young and then having to go to Spain, and mostly every time that we go to Spain, I spend time with family. I don't know the geography of Spain that well. I haven't visited many provinces, and I haven't traveled in Europe that much, other than just going to meetings.
Yeah.
And it's something that I would like to do. So probably I will spend a fair amount of time in Spain and hopefully visiting other places in Europe that I have never visited.
Right. So favorite food.
Oof. I'm a big eater. Um, but I would say probably fish.
Okay.
I think we have a good fish in Spain. I love fish.
Favorite movie.
There are a couple of them. One of them is Fitzcarraldo from Werner Herzog. I don't know if you have seen that movie.
I have not.
Is I like beauty. and this is a movie about a crazy character in the Amazon in the days of the robber barons.
Right.
Wanted to build an opera house in Iquitos. It, it was already one opera house in Manaus, but he wanted to build one in Iquitos. It's just a magnificent, a beautiful movie, just for the sake of beauty. I
Okay.
also like my
Mhm.
other favorite movie. I had to have two. Um, is the movie by Fellini, Amarcord.
Ah,
It's all about. It's again. It's all about. That is about somebody who just can tell a story.
yeah, yeah.
Those are probably my favorite
The
movies.
whole of history is, of course, about stories, isn't it? It's,
Correct. Correct.
what is your greatest extravagance?
I don't have many. I'm a rural guy. I'm a very simple, simple man. Um, I don't know what would consider extravagance.
So, there was a time, and I don't know whether you still are, but there was a time where in the UK you would have been referred to as a mammal. Do you know what a mammal is? A
No.
mammal stands for middle-aged men in lycra.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
Which,
yeah. I mean, I think I was thinking about that. I think yeah, that's an extravaganza. I like cycling.
yeah.
I still do. Um, of course, in this place, I cannot ride every day because it's now very cold and we don't have enough hours. But this morning at 5:30 in the morning, I was in my stationary bike to do my 45 minutes. Yeah, I think that's a little bit of an extravaganza, and I have done some extravagant trips. I have done trips to the Alps, to the Pyrenees, to ride with friends for a week. I think that can be considered an extravagance.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind of a
sure.
low key, but
Absolutely.
yes.
Yeah.
And yeah,
What is the one talent you would like to have that you do not have?
I mean, there are many that I would like to have. I would like to be more creative. I would like to speak better. Um, I mean, I think those are things that I appreciate on people when I see somebody who really is creative and is able to think out of the box. Um, that's something that it really attracts me. And yeah, I also um, people that they are able to communicate clearly and precisely is something that I admire and I value.
It's interesting, when I think there is, as you say, in terms of, you'd like to speak better. So I know you're always very concerned about, your English and your speaking with your accent, etc. But the reality is that there is an advantage to that because you have an accent, it forces people to listen carefully to hear what you're actually saying. Whereas if you have a voice like mine, which is just boring,
I wouldn't say that.
people just they go to sleep, Whereas when you're speaking, people, will go, hang on, I need to listen here, what he's saying, etc. So it's not all bad.
It maybe not bad, but I don't know why. It's something that I admire on people when I see it, and
The
and
great,
I
the
pay
great
attention.
communicators, yeah, the great communicators.
Correct.
Yeah.
Communicators, is I mean, not only you know what they say, but how they say it. But when I see somebody who is a good communicator, is something that I admire
Yeah,
and
no,
I
for
would like to
sure.
have. Yeah.
I remember years and years ago, I was sitting in a hotel room in the United States on some trip from England. I was living in England at the time, and I was watching the TV and talking to my wife on the phone. And I said, I'm watching this guy on the TV who reminds me, he's giving a speech and he reminds me of Tony Blair. And she said, What do you mean? I said, Well, I don't know what he's talking about. I said, but he's a really good speaker. Tony Blair was a very, very good speaker. And the guy I was watching was Barack Obama. He's a leaving aside his politics or whether you like or dislike what he says, he's a superb orator, a great communicator.
Correct. Yeah, that's something that
As indeed Ronald Reagan was, and people like that. It's a gift, for
yep, yep.
sure.
It's a great asset to have,
Yeah.
definitely.
What living figure or which living figure do you admire?
Mm, that's a difficult question. I mean, I think there are many people in many different areas. Um, they put me on the spot. Um, Again, I admire many people
Hmm.
in politics. I admire people in medicine. Um, I admire people in my environment. Um, my kids, how they have come out after what I have put them through.
Yes.
My wife for being very patient, um,
Yes.
patient with me and very supportive and always in good mood. Um, I admire a lot of my colleagues,
Yeah.
how they go through their life and how they behave as a clinicians, as a friends, and as colleagues.
Well, let me ask you something slightly different because it is a very difficult question to answer. But if you had the opportunity to have dinner tomorrow night with any single figure from history, alive or dead, who would you choose? Who would you invite to come to dinner?
Well, one of the characters that I'm always been very attracted to and is very, very, very controversial, it will be Winston Churchill.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think probably it will be one of the most interesting conversations. I know how controversial it has been historically, but for some reason, um, I feel very attracted to him, and is somebody who I would have, like to have uh, dinner with. Of course, there are many other people that would have liked to.
You would not have a very healthy dinner with Churchill, and there would be
No,
a very large amount of alcohol drunk.
I probably will.
If
The
you, I don't
famous,
know if you've read
famous.
about
I don't
his.
know if I would have smoked, a Cuban cigar, but I think it would have been interesting um, for his sense of leadership. I mean, there are many things about him that make him a very attractive personality. There are others in history that I would have liked to,
Yeah, he's.
but I have studied him a fair amount. Also the other person that attracts me is Hamilton for uh,
Hmm.
all considering for his background, where he started and where he ended, um, just picking his brain and how you know he moved from those two different worlds and two different spheres. It would have been, and the vision that he had about how this country were going to be, it would have been also very interesting. I think yeah.
How would you, not that you're about to disappear, but how would you like to be remembered? And
Well,
I'm going to slightly ruin that question by saying I watched somebody ask that question of Pep Guardiola recently.
yeah.
I'll hear your answer first.
Well, I would like to be remembered as somebody who was honest and that tried to give his best as a clinician every day. That would be probably the way I would like to be remembered in life and in the specialty. Um, yeah,
Those are
I think
very
those
good,
are the two things that are
very,
the most important.
very reasonable things. I'm interested that I have been interested over the last few years asking people that question that younger people will give you some slightly different answer, but the more senior people focus on just being remembered as a good person, and as you say, being honest and doing your best. Some people say, I don't really care if I'm not remembered, but Pep Guardiola, when he was asked, how would you like to be remembered? He was immediate in his answer and he said, I do not wish to be remembered.
Well,
It's very
that was the
specific, it's
that
active.
was the second part I was going to say,
Mm.
but I have a very clear expectation of for how long you're going to be remembered.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
This is we are when I when we talk about the end of our career and the end of our lives, I say we're all replaceable. We are just
Yeah.
we are we are minuscule. We are a grain of sand in the biggest beach in the world.
No, for sure.
So we are nothing. We will be remembered for 1 minute. That's the reason why at the end of the day I say how I would like to be remembered because that's how I like to behave every day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I want to go home every night thinking that I gave my best in what I do.
I
Uh,
think those are very good words for us to finish on. It's been, you and I have known each other for many years, and I've always admired what you've done, that persistence and focus in one thing or another, and it's been a true pleasure talking to you today. And I'm really grateful that you spent some time talking to me. It's wonderful to see you.
yeah, nice talking to you as usual. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're welcome.